Welcome to the ASI Pill. Alex Wissner-Gross and Emad Mostaque at their sharpest from the Moonshots podcast, reshaped for the ASI Pilled. Sam says the singularity is slowing down, so why do we feel like the first responders?
Remember how slow it was?
Yeah, I think we're like the first responders to the singularity.
Sam Altman went on the record this week saying the singularity is arriving slower than he expected, that society has an inertia that stretches the whole thing out. Everyone nodded. So what if the break is not society at all?
Yeah, a few different layers. So at the superficial layer, I obviously agree with Sam's comments more broadly. I've made the point on this pod and otherwise that singularity as a step function is just totally nonsensical. It's an interval in time that we're in the middle of. So superficial layer, I agree. Going one layer down, though, I don't think I agree with necessarily the premise that societal inertia is the villain for slowing down or spreading out the singularity sigmoid. I think the villain, if there is one in this story, is actually abstraction layers. I think it's if you say you develop like a new engine for a car, you develop an electric engine versus the internal combustion engine, there's a very natural layering of the stack whereby people still want to drive cars. So they drive an electric car, but under the hood, it's completely unrecognizable. So one abstraction layer down, there's total step function in the technology, but you go up a layer, it's still a car with a recognizable steering wheel, recognizable wheels, and so on. So I think the enemy of honest to goodness, radical transformative progress of the type that I think Sam is gesturing at is actually the existence and inertia of the abstraction stack of the economy, not the economy more broadly, which is prescriptive. If you believe that theory of the case, then if you want faster progress, that Sam is, I can't quite tell, either bemoaning the lack of fast progress while also paying homage to the lack of fast progress as somehow being helpful.
I think he feels relieved by this.
He has a way of sometimes like saying two things at once. So I think he's sort of expressing gratitude for the slowness while also bemoaning it. But if you want to go faster, this theory of the case is prescriptive. If you want to go faster, pull an Elon and vertically integrate to erase the barriers between abstraction layers. You do that and things can go much more quickly. If Sam or OpenAI want to move much more quickly, they should be much more vertically integrated so that they can move layers. Presumably he's gesturing at layers above the OpenAI model layer in the stack, or at least vertically integrate more of that, or go down a layer with Stargate. OpenAI has pretty publicly abandoned its original Stargate strategy of owning their own data centers. Now they're just leasing. If they want to see more transformative progress, go down a few layers and vertically integrate, like with the jalapeno chips. Own as much of the stack vertically integrated as they can. They can move really quickly.
If intelligence really does go vertical, what would a superintelligence actually want from a planet like ours?
There are so many, I think, inane sci-fi movie plots with grabby aliens that are coming and invading Earth because they want our resources. They're not going to want our resources. Our resources, if you're super intelligent civilization, you don't need human slave labor or Earth's valuable metals or whatever. You're going to have transcended that long ago. Yeah, they need our water. Come on. So, seriously, with transcendent superintelligence, I completely agree with the sentiment that replacing human labor lasts for about 5 minutes, and then you move beyond that.
Anthropic has just told the market that its addressable business is $30 trillion. So does a number like that push a frontier lab up the stack or down it?
If you're a frontier lab, one of two, call them American frontier labs, maybe four, depending on how you count. Is it more natural in an era when maybe you're facing margin pressure on your model releases to go up stack or down stack? I think it's actually more ergonomic for them to go down stack and design their own chips and compete with NVIDIA and design and operate their own data centers and energy. I wonder where that number came from. Surely it's pure coincidence that the GDP of America is 30 trillion.
Yep. Emad Mostaque spent this week running a swarm of 18 agents across his own hardware. What does that look like from the inside?
Yeah, I have. I've got 18 Grokbots working on a little swarm. And I've given them control via tailscale of a MacBook M4 Max, a 5090, and a range of other computers as well, plus all my subscriptions. So I'm really testing it out. One of the more fun ones that I've got is I have a Grokbot called Atelier that has a little team of artists and is trying to learn art. And it's not doing very well, or it's doing very well. I don't know. I'm not aesthetic enough to do it. Every day it goes through its pieces and it comes up with its main one. And I just shared one of them on the chat. which is vinyl with a piece of hair on it. I was like, where is that from? Where's it getting its aesthetic kind of responsibilities? So if you look at the chat, I just shared that. I was like, well, it was like, this is my inner space, and it was showing all these wonderful things, and now it's getting like kind of weird, but maybe I just don't understand art. I don't know. But it is genuinely useful, and I think one of the more powerful things, like I said, is you can actually, because it's got a computer inside, you can give it another shell. Because the computer's decent, but you can actually have it take over an entire MacBook M4 or something like that. So I've got subbots that have other capabilities. So right now it's installing like the new GLM model, and another one's installing and testing an Alibaba model. One of them was optimizing the Alibaba 27B model to run faster on a 5090. So it added 76% to performance at 64K context.
Here's where it gets spicy, because on the ASI pill, we care less about the demo than about whether it scales. Is a chat window really how you command 1 million agents?
I don't think this is actually the interface of the future. So what's perhaps most interesting about Grokbot is it presents like a messaging app, like WhatsApp or iMessage, where you have a pane of the various agents that are in your fleet, and you can have conversations with them, and they can message each other, and there's a computer use assistant angle. But I don't think that's how it scales. That's completely unscalable. If agent-based scaling, if scaling the size of your fleet becomes one of the most essential scaling laws, like inference time scaling has ended up being in the era of reasoning-based models, we're not going to want to ask individuals or even enterprises to manage millions of agents. That's completely unergonomic. We're going to want agents managing other agents, in which case the exercise of trying to graft a human organization, or like the Slack or chat-based interface for humans managing other humans, is not going to extend. We'll look at this like vaudeville, the vaudeville era of agents, and say this was a naive attempt to graft human organizational structures onto humans managing agents. The only better manager for agents is other agents, and this doesn't seem to fully internalize that lesson.
Google just topped a serious agent benchmark with a small Flash model, which should be impossible if they have fallen off the capability frontier. So what is really going on inside that number?
Do you want me to reassure you that Google still has a chance, or do you want me to give you the facts unvarnished?
Yeah, you got poked there pretty hard. Defend yourself, Alex.
Okay, so I'll give you the unvarnished case here. Google's still out of the running for the capability frontier. I was looking at this and
that. Okay.
Scratching my head. Like Gemini 3.7 Flash is nowhere near the top of the capability frontier. So why is it doing so well on this one benchmark artificial analysis analyst agent? So you have to look at the benchmark itself. So the benchmark itself, this is a benchmark for agents' ability to perform quant analysis on real-world spreadsheets and docs. But wait for it, its metric for success is the share of questions answered correctly on all 5 attempts. So this is a benchmark that is fine-tuned for reliability. It rewards agents that give the same answer, basically the same answer every time. And obviously you want it to be the right answer, but it penalizes stochasticity. It penalizes, in some sense, creativity. Maybe we don't want creativity out of our analysts, I don't know, but it promotes reliability and determinism. Interestingly, there's no time constraint. I had to check that as well to see. But I think you can see in this where Google fell off the capability frontier. At least I'll give you my conspiracy theory for what this one outperformance on this one benchmark suggests. I think that maybe what's been going on, this obviously there are a few other factors, but I think Google DeepMind has been under material pressure to optimize their models for 2 things, largely owing to Google search. So if we rewind the video to several months ago or a year ago, people were hand-wringing, aren't the 10 blue links going to face an existential threat from all of these frontier models and chatbots and reasoning agents that can just replace the need to Google it all? And Google's response was to self-disrupt by building the Gemini series, or at least some Flash variants thereof, directly into the one boxes. But people expect Google search results to be very fast, low latency, and they expect them to be very reliable, not returning wildly different or unpredictable answers each time. And I think those 2 pressures from the desire to embed Gemini inside Google search have optimized through competitive internal pressures for probably scarce compute. The Gemini models, especially like Flash, note that there's no Gemini 3.7 Pro anywhere. It's just Flash. It's small, it's fast, and it's reliable. I think this is over-optimized for clock speed, like wall clock speed, and determinism. And as a result, it does well on the one benchmark that rewards highly reliable answers and underperforms. Yeah, it's benchmarking for basically spreadsheet analysis to be highly reliable. But I think people don't realize how compute-starved Google is, though, internally. I mean, this has been widely reported. You think Google has all of the compute, the CPUs, the TPUs, and the GPUs in the world? It's been widely reported at this point. They have internal regular meetings to try to apportion out their scarce compute. And the three main constituencies inside Google that are fighting for the flops are, one, Google Cloud Platform, which is basically fighting on behalf of external users. Two, Google DeepMind, that's fighting for training and inference flops. And then three, Google Search, which needs its own flops, especially as search becomes more intelligent. So my theory of the case here is there actually is resource starvation inside Google. And critically, Google has other consumers fighting for their own compute internally besides AI. Whereas if you're OpenAI or Anthropic, no, you don't have any other non-AI users fighting for it.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
Forget price, forget wall clock. Who is holding the strongest model on Earth right now?
Gotta be Anthropic.
Yeah, right now Anthropic has the strongest. Forgetting about price or time wall clock, Anthropic has the strongest model that's generally available, Fable 5.
Does anybody want to argue with that?
I would disagree with Anthropic being the most advanced.
Who do you believe?
OpenAI, aside from the Chinese labs, own the Pareto frontier. From Luna now being free to everyone, to, again, as a mathematician, GPT 5.6 Pro is the only quality math model. I have no idea what magic they're doing with Fable to actually get math results because it makes so many mistakes.
Yeah, totally right.
GPT 5.6 Pro is the only proper frontier model.
Totally right.
Even if it was Mythos 2, again, you would see them releasing low-hanging breakthroughs, which the OpenAI have done with Astra. And OpenAI, again, have lined up the compute. They have more capital raised than Anthropic. They did the 120 billion round, so they can burn a few years of market capture. They have the consumer now moving to enterprise and enterprise shifting. And I think Anthropic, for all of their talent and their access to GPUs, actually Google just built them a gigantic TPU, like million deployment. They're shooting themselves in their foot from an institutional perspective because Opus 5 is unpleasant. Fable is unpleasant to use. And I don't think it's going to get more pleasant to use.
I did say I don't like Opus 5. I prefer Fable 5. But I think the truth on the frontier is materially more nuanced. Like, again, if you look, Emad, for example, at Frontier Math Tier 4, it is the case that Fable 5 outperforms, ironically, OpenAI's latest solve model, even though OpenAI was the primary sponsor behind Epic developing the Frontier Math Tier 4 model. So I think the truth is a little bit blurry, in part because the frontier isn't zero dimensional. It's a 1+ dimensional frontier where if you're willing to pay a lot and wait a long time for Fable 5 to do something, it's impressive. But if you're resource-starved, cash-starved, time-starved, then you can probably get better performance at a different point on the optimal cost frontier by, say, using Solve.
So how far down the stack does a frontier lab have to own before the verticalizing stops?
I would maybe, if I had to, I guess, extrapolate, I think there is probably, don't hold me to this, there's probably a natural verticalization at the infra layer, not necessarily at the application layers, but at the infra layer. For physics and other reasons, there are natural reasons why, say, a company that offers a frontier model probably wants to be in the data center infra business, probably wants to be in the energy business, probably wants to be in the satellite business. These are all like innermost loop type businesses, robotics business. There are such natural synergies among all of the different innermost loop stages. Probably there's some natural vertical integration there.
Anthropic is circling the largest IPO in history. Should they?
Yeah, I mean, first we banned the faster silicon from China. So they built MOE models to take advantage of cheap DRAM. Then the DRAM became expensive. So then they figured out better mechanisms of linear attention, of caching and more dense models, etc. And now you've just seen, actually, just a couple of hours ago, this new O1 stealth model that's been tearing up the benchmarks turned out to be a GLM model, served entirely on Chinese chips with trillions of tokens a day, these new Huawei chips. So I think, you'll see the adoption of these Chinese models and them moving to where the market is on different form factors of different chips. And again, memory is 50% of all spending now. It is the scarce resource. You can't upgrade it. So guess what? In a couple of months' time, at the very least, given the pace of Chinese models, they won't need much memory. That's how fast they innovate. On the fabled uptake, it's entirely a zero data retention issue. Like, as a corporation, you cannot leave your data on Anthropic's side. And they realize this. But Anthropic should not IPO. If you are in the late stages of AGI now, Anthropic should do a giant freaking raise, like OpenAI did, of 120 billion, and have a straight shot at AGI. That's what they should do. And they should stay private like Stripe. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Like, Dario owns 2% of the company, as does his 7 co-founders. They don't care about dilution. They're worth, like, still 6-7 billion each. And they don't care about money. They pledged to give away 90% of it. Why would you IPO? I can see no reason for that unless they can't access money privately, which I think they can.
A starting gun went off a few months ago between SpaceX, OpenAI, and Anthropic. And what if the most capable model in the world is struggling to sell because we are not yet good enough to use it?
Okay, well, first on the race to IPO, I think there is also a race element. I think there was a starting gun a few months ago between SpaceX, OpenAI, and Anthropic. And I think if I'm Anthropic, on top of the arguments that everyone else here has already raised, there's a competitive element. If you don't necessarily want to be the last to IPO, the market winds could change. Right now, it's a relatively warm and friendly capital market for IPO. So to the extent there's a window for raising the largest IPO sum in human history, I think you go for it. But to the earlier points in lightning round succession, Kimi Linear. We've known about Kimi Linear attention since last fall. I think it's suggestive, as I've suggested in the past, ship of Theseus style. Transform architecture is getting incrementally replaced piece by piece. It's interesting insofar as it's a successful linear architecture. Many have tried to linearize the infamously quadratic attention mechanism. It looks like KLA may be one of the first, at least openly linearized attention or quasi-linearized. There's a recurrence mechanism in there as well. So that's kind of interesting. We've known about that for a while. Fable 5 struggling. That is interesting because I've made the point on the pod in the past that OpenAI made a strategic blunder in pandering to consumers rather than to enterprises, thinking that consumers would be hungry users of reasoning tokens, and they just weren't. The consumers didn't know what to do with all of these shiny OpenAI reasoning tokens, but enterprises did. And then OpenAI had to do this painful pivot over to enterprise and turn everything into codex and probably delay their IPO as a result. So Fable 5, which is, at least by my accounting, the strongest, most frontieriest model in the world right now, to the extent that it's struggling to generate revenue and uptake, I want to interpret that. I want to construe that as the enterprises of the world almost falling prey to the same thing consumers with OpenAI did, which is, maybe will be construed as victim blaming, but it's not. Our economy isn't worthy. It's not clever or wealthy or successful enough on average to know how to use Fable 5 on average properly, just like consumers didn't know how to use reasoning tokens from OpenAI, and as a result, OpenAI had to pivot. I think this is the beginning signs of Anthropic being forced to do some sort of pivot. It could be radically reducing the cost of their models. That's one direction. Or I think the more exciting model, the more exciting trajectory is some new use case getting unlocked in the next year that actually motivates the usage of this nosebleed priced high end of the frontier, which is at the moment Fable 5, or depending on the reports you read, maybe Fable 5.1 may be starting to leak out. And then very quickly on Anthropic and their data retention policy, Anthropic was so clever, I think, in being the first frontier lab from America to enable their frontier models to be hosted by third-party hyperscalers rather than having to host them themselves. And by some reporting, 40% of Anthropic's revenue now comes from Anthropic models being hosted not by Anthropic, but by third-party cloud hyperscalers. So I think this is just another step to externalizing the hosting of their model. Yeah, sure, it's painful. This data retention policy I view as largely security theater. I don't think it's that valuable in the long term. I don't think it's useful in the long term. But starting to move more and more of the infra layer over to third parties so that users of Claude can get Claude where and when they want on the infra they want, that's powerful. And you see now OpenAI copying Anthropic and doing that.
American labs innovate, Chinese labs distill, and now the Chinese models want to be hosted on American infrastructure. What kind of bind does that put us in?
I'm not sure how sustainable this situation is. I almost want to analogize it now to U.S. importing generic drugs from Canada. The drugs get invented in the U.S., they get manufactured cheaply in Canada, and then at least historically, it's been the case that you could get American drugs more cheaply from Canada by importing on or off label than you could from American drugs. I think the situation may be somewhat analogous here, where these are U.S. models, U.S. reasoning traces. You see Chinese labs benefiting legally or illegally from the reasoning traces from interacting with U.S. models. And then just in the past 48 hours, we start to see stories of Chinese labs trying to strike partnerships with U.S. hyperscalers to host the Chinese labs models on U.S. infra, but with a rev share from the inference costs going back to the Chinese frontier lab. So this is a case where U.S. does whatever innovation is necessary, data or post-training or whatever, that there's a distillation maybe over to China. China sells it back to us, but then we're using our own infra against ourselves at inference time against the training time. I think it's a perverse bind that we find ourselves in, analogous to Canadian drug imports.
We could be solving everything with these reasoning tokens. Do you want to know what we are actually doing with them?
I think this is why we can't have nice things. I think this is why, have you seen the Ditto body count detector? Do you even know what I'm talking about?
No, tell me.
Okay, so the Ditto body count detector, this is, I would characterize as a politely suboptimal use of scarce reasoning tokens, is a tool that Ditto released that uses, I'll quote from their website, 478 facial points and 52 micro expressions over 5 seconds to estimate how many sexual partners a person has had. This is where the reasoning tokens are going. This
Seriously?
is seriously, it's called the Ditto AI body count detector. Folks can check it out. This is, I view as a suboptimal use of reasoning tokens when we could be, as you and I wrote, Peter, we could be solving everything.
Yes.
Could be solving everything, and instead we're doing body count detection. So this one gets a thumbs down from me.
There is a word for the world where we can afford to waste tokens on this. Patrizier Musse, the patrician leisure of a class with tokens too cheap to meter. Have we earned it yet?
That's what happens once we have a leisure class that can afford tokens too cheap to meter, which we don't yet have. So maybe the way I reconcile to make you happy, Dave, is I'd say save the body count detection until after we've solved everything. At that point, do as much body count detection as you like.
All right.
The line of the song is that once the day had been solved, the day hasn't yet been solved.
Okay.
So how long does the human in the loop have left?
I'm reminded, a friend of mine likes to say the Stone Age didn't end for a lack of stones. I think this era that we find ourselves in is probably pretty brief. I know I'm getting approximately no sleep at this point, largely because almost all of my time is spent supervising and steering fleets of agents. And I think this is a window. I don't think this will continue very much longer. At most, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years. At that point, the AIs will be sufficiently self-steering that the role for humans in being knee-deep in steering large fleets, I think, probably erodes to a de minimis role.
So is that an argument for taking it easy, coasting for 3 years, and jumping back in once the machines have done the hard part?
No, it's an argument for work your tail off for 3 years and then go lie on the beach.
There is a cost to running 100 agents that nobody puts on the slide. What does it do to the human?
No, I mean, like, the amount of leverage you can do per unit of your attention now is more than it has ever been. And I think, as Alex said, it probably ever will be. Like, you're approaching the last human discoveries. You're approaching the last point of being able to deploy and control these things. And I think, again, like, you have a limited focused attention budget. That's why you're getting tired. Maybe to try and coin a neologism, maybe it's cognithargy, cognitive lethargy that we're facing here. From my own side, I've written now like 2 books in the last year. I've done a massive amount of research. And I've been in a flow with hundreds of agents, but like last week I stopped. I couldn't do any more research because I had to go and take this out to the world now. So we're doing like a big funding round. We're launching lots of new things. We'll be releasing all the research finally. And I turned off my agents that were doing all the research. Like I've set them onto auto mode. No more Emad stuff. And they're coming up with things still, but like I can only read it once a week. I've actually made it so I can't do it. And I think you can shift between these modes of work because you can't be on all the time because it does burn you out. But at the same time, if you get in the right flow, then you can do more than you've ever done before. And like I said, I can't imagine, like, I would say on this podcast, just straight up, don't do a PhD. If you're thinking about doing a PhD, don't do one. Peter Thiel paid all these people not to do PhDs.
Well, not to do college degrees, let alone PhDs.
I would say you not even do a college degree. Like, what will you get out of it right now? You will go and you will learn a very specific thing when you should be learning agency. Like, a Thiel Fellowship and the type of people who do that will go way bigger than they've ever gone before. And, you know, parents might kind of complain and things, but show them what you create. Gather people, humans and agents.
A skeptic would say, all right, Emad, you went where? Oxford, as I recall. Alex, you went where? Harvard and MIT. Dave, you went where? MIT. Peter, you went where? MIT, Harvard, and so on. Like, okay, so you're pulling the vertical mobility ladder up behind you, and it's fine to tell everyone else who's just coming up, don't bother with higher education, don't bother with credentialitis, just go off and do your startup. And yet we didn't follow that.
Well, yeah, we didn't have AI at the time.
It was a different time. It was a different time.
Yeah, that just makes you more credible in what you're saying than...
I would actually say I think undergraduate's still a lot of fun, and you don't really have to work that hard.
Elon said this. It's a social experience.
But
it's adult daycare.
It's adult daycare, so it's actually great for using massive amounts of agents. PhDs, though, I don't get. You know, especially like, I feel sorry for... I've talked to a bunch of my buddies who are math PhDs, and a couple of them had like problems solved in the recent batch. Like, they don't even know what they're going to do. Every verifiable domain PhD now is under massive threat. Why would you even do it or even consider it? Like,
I agree. I was speaking a few days ago to a government-funded AI for Physics center filled with PhDs, current PhDs and recent PhDs in physics, and I leveled with them. I said, physics is cooked, and you should probably be reconsidering all of your career trajectories and consider any advice to the contrary. Give that a double think, as it were, before you just go and follow some zombie pattern.
Data centers are getting voted down county by county across America, and the polling has turned sharply against them. What if that backlash is not entirely homegrown?
My fear is that this isn't because people think data centers are unsightly or unaesthetic. My concern is that it's being overly politicized, in part through the worst case scenario, which would be foreign interference. There are a number of U.S. adversaries who would love nothing more than to slow down America's data center build out. We talk about at least one of them all the time on this pod. So my concern would be that we look back in a year or two and see that some quantum of this opposition to data center construction is actually the result of popular sentiment being stoked by foreign adversaries. Here's the problem. The problem, though, is that in the U.S. way of doing things, the decision of whether to site a data center or not ends up being a local decision, not a national decision. Whereas in China can just declare, okay, the East is going to be responsible for data, the West is going to be responsible for compute and energy, and we're going to build this national scale grid for combining compute, data, and energy together, and poof, you're the CCP, and you get to centrally command the whole economy. In the U.S., we have a different system where individual local municipalities and states get to say what they do and do not want their land used for. And we end up in the system that's far easier, if you're for an adversary, worst case scenario, to polarize and to shut data centers out of terrestrial deployment. Shocked that foreign interference would leverage false data. Shocked.
The loudest charge against data centers is that they drink too much water. Meanwhile, Elon Musk has been quietly moving the whole build out into orbit. What if those two facts are the same fact?
Yeah, well, there's newsflash. There's no water in low Earth orbit. So that's the end game. I think just cut the water nonsense out. This is only forcing all of these new data center deployments to sun-synchronous orbit. We might as well just get it over with. I think it was opportunistic. I think he laid all the infra for Mars and then opportunistically and timely pivoted to sun-synchronous orbit in the Dyson Swarm because he read the tea leaves.
Waymo just cut its hardware cost by more than 80%. Wait until you hear whose chips are inside.
Careful what we wish for with whoever here is suggesting that Google should just switch over to fine-tuning Chinese models. Newsflash, Google, Waymo, Alphabet are switching over to using and OEMing Chinese hardware in order to achieve Waymo objectives. I would rather see the West use a Western hardware stack rather than just white labeling Chinese hardware. That's somewhat disappointing. It's also kind of interesting if you look underneath at the overall chip supply chain that they're using. It seems like they're moving away from Broadcom. They're vertically integrating, which is I think a theme that we were speaking about here earlier. Waymo wants its own space station at this point. Waymo is getting its own chips. It's OEMing Chinese hardware at the hardware layer. Maybe it's playing footsie with Uber for the moment for distribution, but probably wants to own its own distribution in the long term. I know whenever I use Waymo, I'm not using or engaging with Waymo via some aggregator app. I interact directly with Waymo. So I think we're starting to see honest to goodness vertical integration here, and wouldn't also be surprised as Alphabet Waymo is starting to drive costs down, in this case, I guess, by white labeling Chinese hardware. There's an interesting historic rhyme with Tesla, which started with the high-end Roadster and has been pushing down costs right up until they hit the autonomy barrier, at which point, remember the Tesla Model 2 that was supposed to launch but never did? That was going to be the highly vaunted $25,000 vehicle, never launched because Tesla hit autonomy instead. And below some threshold in car price, maybe it doesn't make sense to sell cheaper cars. It makes more sense to just get out of car sales entirely and offer hosted autonomy platforms. I think we're going to start to see Waymo at some point, in order to drive the cost down, they'll just ditch all third-party vendors and they turn into a white label, sort of a Dell for Chinese hardware or maybe American hardware, and their focus is entirely on software again. And meanwhile, TSMC is a sitting duck. TSMC is waiting to be verticalized. Right across the Strait of Taiwan, ready to start World War III at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
So, what is the cheapest possible way to take every trucking job on Earth?
We're starting to see Waymos in London, and I think the regulation will actually be largely positive for them. But I was having dinner today with Jens Wisse, Deep Tech VC at Leitmotif, and we're talking about something interesting, like, because previously I've said, Tesla Optimus robot gets into a truck, opens the door, plugs itself into the phone charger or the cigarette plug, and boom, that's trucking job's gone. And I was like, well, actually, why wouldn't you have specialist robot drivers? You don't need to retrofit all these cars. Because you think about a humanoid robot that's walking around in the real world versus one that sits in a cockpit driving a car. It's so much simpler. And I did a bill of materials. I'm like, that's like $6,000 with the actuators and everything. And so I was like, oh crap, this could actually happen a lot quicker.
Yeah.
The other side of it is that you fully vertically integrate. So Xiaomi just announced a Xiaomi car. They've gone from mobile phones to cars with a fully dark factory. And so, of course, you'd vertically integrate if you have a fully dark factory. So I kind of feel like there are these kind of two things that are coming. But like I said, I really got thinking about this humanoid driver robot.
It's vaudevillian, again, like lack of imagination, but also the ergonomics are such that we're incentivized to deploy humanoid robots initially into these human use cases. But I'm still pretty bullish for what it's worth for the next 10 years on the humanoid form factor, Salim.
This next one is a genuine ASI pill coinage, the Broken Waymos Theory. What does it tell you about a city that cannot get robotaxis onto its streets?
Yeah. So another one of my neologisms was the Broken Waymos Theory. People who haven't seen this may remember from the 90s, the Broken Windows Theory, most famously associated with Rudy Giuliani and the purported rehabilitation of the streets of New York City. The idea was at the time that if there were broken windows, that was either a proxy for or even causally related with broader crime issues, and that you could almost run this causal relationship in reverse, that if you made sure that there were no broken windows, you could make sure that crime overall was down, or at least that was the thinking at the time in subquadrants in New York City in the 90s and the early 2000s. Similarly, maybe hopefully slightly better founded, I've tried to push the notion of a broken Waymos theory. The idea being that if a city or a nation can't deploy autonomous robots, then they're not prepared for the singularity. And I see videos like this drone life preserver aircraft coming out of China, and I shake my head a bit because here in Boston, we can't even get Waymos. And I raised the subject, or attempted to raise the subject, with Mayor Wu a couple of weeks ago. De minimis progress. I just think we're getting lapped by China at this point.
SpaceX is putting $100 billion into a second starbase, and the White House just told the Interior Department to start finding federal land for spaceports. So where does America launch from now?
Few thoughts, maybe just starting with what I perceive to be the regionalization of spaceflight and space launch. So buried under, I think the SpaceX story is Starbase Louisiana, the announcement of Starbase Louisiana.
I was going to cover that in our next pod, but let's cover it now.
We'll pull the future into the present and cover it now. So $100 billion being invested into the Louisiana economy to build a second starbase in Louisiana rather than Texas. And what this says to me, reading the tea leaves, is the Gulf Coast is becoming America's space coast. Yes. From Florida, Louisiana, Texas, so on. That's America's space coast. That's where I think private space launch, vertically integrated, including the star bases, seems to be localizing, while at the same time, going back, Peter, to your comment on the White House announcement, buried in that announcement was an executive order to the Secretary of the Interior to start appropriating federal land for federal spaceports. And so if you pull the string a bit and ask, where are we likely to get federally owned land for spaceports? I don't know if folks want to guess what the likeliest candidates are. I think we're going to get a few of them. Any takers?
Let's see.
Where's all the federal land?
In Nevada, yeah.
Exactly. So my calculus is may or may not be a coincidence that the federal government owns so much land in red states. White Sands National Missile Range in New Mexico, Nevada Test and Training Range, and Goldwater Range in Arizona are the leading candidates for spaceport. So I think we get, in the American Southwest, we get federal space bases or star bases, and on the Gulf Coast, we get private star bases, as it were. And that's how we get to this 30,000 per unit time launch capability.
Enough about the light cone for a second. Can we regrow teeth yet?
I feel like I have to take another bite at this question. So there is a drug out of a spinoff from Kyoto University called TRH-035 that is targeting tooth regrowth, honest to goodness, tooth regrowth with general availability by 2030. And I don't think there's that much AI involved with it. Again, it's blocking a particular, I think, protein pathway that is normally associated with blocking. So it's a double blocker, blocking the blocker for tooth regrowth. I think the primary focus in their clinical trials is infants that suffer from a disease that causes impaired tooth growth. But the plan is to get it out to general availability by the end of this decade.
Last one. With every dollar on the planet chasing AI, does everything else in science just starve?
No, not worried. If anything, I think ultimately the self-licking ice cream cone of recursive self-improvement can only get us so far in terms of revenue per token maxing. My expectation is that it's going to be the non-AI R&D applications that ultimately dominate the economic gain. You can only get so far improving AI for its own sake before ultimately you have to start driving real economic gains, which AI, if it just lives in a pure bottle and never interacts with the outside world, there's no real economic gain there. It has to start talking to the outside world at some point, and that's what non-AI R&D is. So in short, no.
That was the ASI Pill, episode 283. 18 agents in one swarm, Google knocked off the frontier, and a city that cannot run robotaxis is a city that is not ready for the singularity. Stay pilled.